My daughter threw open the door of my lakeside house, dropping 3 oversized designer duffel bags, and declared, "We're taking the master bedroom. You and Mom can sleep in the basement." I said no, quietly. Her husband's answer was to seize my wife's favorite oak chair and fling it at my head. Blood trickled down my neck while my daughter screamed, "You're so selfish. Look what you made him do." Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. Glad you're here with me today. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. There's something about knowing who's out there that makes telling a story like this feel less like talking into the dark. Now, a quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. The truth at the heart of it, though, that part is real. 71 years old. 42 of them spent pulling wire-bending conduit and crawling through the electrical guts of commercial buildings all across North Carolina. I grew that company from nothing, a single pickup truck and a worn leather tool belt, into one of the biggest commercial electrical contracting firms in the Southeast. Never felt the need to crow about it. That Tuesday afternoon in October, I was settled into my armchair beside the window, working through the newspaper the way I had every afternoon since retirement, a mug of black tea on the side table, the thin autumn light pressing in through the curtains. Lake Wiley out front was flat and gray and still. Lorene was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around in there, the soft drag of a pot across the stove, the low, tuneless hum she always kept going when something on the burner needed her full attention. That was the last quiet moment I'd have for a long time to come. The front door did not open. It exploded open, swung back hard enough to crack against the wall, and Derek Prudhomme walked through it like he was stepping into property that had already been signed over to him. Right on his heels came my daughter Carla, chin-up designer coat without a wrinkle, eyes moving across my living room with the cool detachment of someone mentally redecorating a space they intend to occupy. Derek was 38 years old and built like a man who had spent far more time in hotel fitness centers than anywhere near an actual job site. He had on a navy blazer over a gray shirt, no tie. That studied, expensive kind of casual that announces without a word, "I don't have to try." He dumped 3 oversized designer duffel bags onto my hardwood floor and said nothing. The thud rolled through the floorboards. I folded my newspaper slowly and set it down. "Derek," I said. "Carla." Not one greeting between them. Carla crossed her arms and looked at me the way you look at a piece of furniture you haven't decided whether to keep or haul to the curb. "Dad, we're moving in," she said. Bright voice clipped syllables, the tone she used when she had already mapped out how the conversation would end and was simply walking you through it. Derek had a major project pulling him closer to the city, and their condo was going through renovations. They were taking the master bedroom. I needed to have my things cleared out by tonight and move myself down to the basement. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I turned to Derek, who was already drifting around my living room, with his hands in his pockets studying the crown molding, with a faint curl of his lip, the look of a health inspector, making a list of violations. Lorene appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in her hands, eyes moving from Carla to Derek to the bags on the floor, and then back to me. She didn't speak. She just stood there, and I could see the muscles along her jaw go tight. I thought about the flannel shirt I had on, old and soft, worn pale at the elbows. Carla had knitted it for me when she was 12. It took her 6 weeks. She unraveled it twice and began again because she couldn't get the collar to lie the way she wanted. She handed it to me on Father's Day, wrapped in notebook paper with a hand-drawn bow. At a Christmas dinner 2 years back, Derek had said it loud enough for everyone at the table to catch, "That ratty old thing makes you look like a janitor." Russ. Carla had laughed. I still had the exact sound of that laugh stored somewhere I couldn't reach in and throw away. "No," I said. Derek stopped moving. He turned around slowly, and whatever polished surface he'd been wearing dropped away like a mask sliding off a nail. "Excuse me," he said. I said no. I got up from that armchair and put my feet flat on the floor. "You are not taking my bedroom, and you are not moving into my house. If you need a place to land while your condo gets sorted out, there are hotels in Charlotte that will serve you just fine." Derek covered the distance between us in 3 strides. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne, and something under it, something close to desperation, though I didn't have the full picture of that yet. "We're not asking you, Russ," he said. His voice had gone low and deliberate, which was somehow more unsettling than if he'd just shouted. "We are telling you! You're one old man rattling around a 4-bedroom house. It's ridiculous. You're moving your things downstairs tonight, and that's the end of the discussion. This is my house, I said. I bought it. I paid for it. I'll sleep wherever I choose. Derek's face cycled through several shades in quick succession. The measured voice evaporated. You ignorant old man. The words came out sharp, his chest rising and falling hard. You have no idea how the real world operates, not the first clue. You spent your whole life screwing in light bulbs, and you think that earns you the right to stand there and lecture me? Carla made a sound behind him, somewhere between a sigh and a groan. Dad, please, she said. Just go along with it. This doesn't need to become a whole production. I looked at my daughter, the girl I had driven 4 hours each way to see every single weekend of her freshman year, because she'd called me crying that first night and said the dining hall food tasted like cardboard. The girl I had sat beside in a hospital waiting room for 11 straight hours when she was 8 years old and burning with fever, refusing to leave that chair until a doctor stood in front of me and told me she was going to be fine. That girl was standing in my living room, asking me to sleep in the basement so her husband could have my bedroom. Derek moved toward the dining table. His hand reached out and closed around the back of one of the oak chairs, the ones Lorene and I had bought with the check from my first real commercial contract, the ones she still polished every Sunday morning. He lifted it off the floor, and something behind his eyes told me exactly what was about to happen. I want you to know what it feels like to watch something you built get destroyed in under 3 seconds. That chair was not furniture. Lorene and I had bought that dining set in the spring of 1986 with the first check I ever deposited from a commercial electrical contract, a 6-unit apartment building on the east side of Charlotte. Nothing grand, but it was mine. We drove out to a furniture warehouse on a Saturday morning, with the ink on that check barely dry, and Lorene ran her palm along the grain of the oak table and said, "Russ, this is real wood. This will last longer than we will." She polished those chairs every Sunday morning, every single Sunday for 38 years. Derek lifted that chair off the floor, wound back with both arms, and hurled it straight at my head. I got my left forearm up in time to take part of it, but not enough to stop it. The solid oak edge caught my cheekbone, and the side of my skull with a crack I felt more than I heard. The chair exploded against the wall behind me, splitting into 4 heavy pieces that scattered across the hardwood. I stumbled back my hip, catching the armchair's edge, and my hand went straight to my face, warm and wet. My fingers came away red. The pain showed up a full second later, a deep searing throb that radiated out from my cheekbone, up through my eye socket, and down into my jaw. My vision blurred at the edges. I blinked hard and pulled myself upright, pressing my palm flat to my cheek, and I looked at my daughter. Carla was standing in the exact spot she'd been standing before. She hadn't moved. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't come forward. Her hands were clasped in front of her. And what was on her face was not horror. It was not grief. It was deep, thorough irritation, the expression of a woman watching someone cause a scene at the worst possible moment. "Look what you made him do, Dad," she said, voice tight-clipped, completely level. "You're being so selfish. We are your family. We're asking for one simple thing, and you are turning it into this." She gestured at the blood on my hand, as though it were a spill I had brought on myself. "Derek is under enormous pressure right now, and you are making everything so much worse. You are so stubborn." Something inside my chest gave way right then, not from the blow. The blow I could absorb. It was her voice. It was the complete and total absence of anything that resembled concern that her father was bleeding on the floor of his own home. That was the wound that went all the way through. Derek straightened his blazer. His nostrils flared with each breath. The flush hadn't left his face, but the rest of him had already reassembled into that practiced composure he carried everywhere, like armor he never fully took off. One finger came up, aimed at me. "You've got until we're back from dinner," he said. "Either your belongings are downstairs by then, or I'll move them myself." He grabbed his keys off the entry table. He and Carla headed out the door, the way you leave a hardware store, task, completed, nothing worth lingering over. Carla never turned around. I stayed planted in the middle of my own living room, blood tracing a line down my neck and soaking into the flannel collar, the shirt her 12-year-old hands had knitted stitch by careful stitch. I watched the door swing shut. Then Lorene appeared from around the kitchen corner. Every word had reached her. I could read it in her face, the pallor that had taken the place of her usual color, the fine trembling in her hands still wrapped around the dish towel. The moment her gaze landed on the blood, the air left her in one sharp intake. Russ. Just that word, and her voice didn't hold together. I'm fine, I said. You are not fine. She was across the room before I could say anything else, her palms framing my face, tilting my head so she could see the damage clearly. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she didn't release them. You need stitches. Right now, Russ, I know, I said. She laid the towel flat against my cheek and held it there, and then her forehead came down to meet mine. We stayed like that for a moment, still in the middle of all that wreckage, the broken oak scattered around us from a chair she'd run a polishing cloth over every Sunday for 38 years. She straightened up, and her eyes locked onto mine, steady and clear. Go, she said. Drive to Novant Health Pineville. I'll get Clifton on the phone. I took my keys off the hook near the door. Out to the truck, settled in behind the wheel, and checked the mirror. The wound was deep, the edges uneven, still pushing blood through the cloth. The shirt was done for. My whole left cheek had begun thickening already. I reached for my phone. I scrolled to Clifton Abernathy, my attorney, 17 years, managing my commercial trusts and corporate holdings, working with the kind of methodical, quiet lethality that most people don't know is even possible until the day they desperately need it. 4 words. It is time, Clifton. Send. I turned the key. Backing down the driveway, I noticed something shift in my chest. Not rage, not sorrow, but something that sat below both of those. Something with weight and temperature to it. The particular calm that settles over a man when patience long stretched thin finally gives way to resolve. Novant Health. Pineville had that smell antiseptic layered over conditioned air, the low hum of dread that gathers in rooms where people show up already broken. A nurse named Darlene clocked the blood-soaked towel against my face the instant I walked in and steered me around the waiting room without pausing for paperwork. She guided me into an examination bay, snapped gloves on, and drew the towel back from the wound with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has handled far worse before her morning coffee. Stitches, she said, a statement, not a guess. Figured as much, I told her. She asked what had happened. My son-in-law put a solid oak chair into my face. Darlene's hands went still. 1 full second of stillness. Then a clean gauze pad replaced the towel, pressed gently to the cut. Before you leave, she said someone from patient services is going to want a word. Is that okay with you? More than okay, I said. Dr. Bascom came in not long after. Compact man, unhurried, with hands that didn't waver, the kind of steadiness that emergency medicine either builds in you or breaks you trying. He angled my chin toward the light overhead and ran a small penlight along the gash. 5 stitches, he said, maybe 6. Any blackouts, vertigo, nausea. None of it, I said. Mind is sharp. He uncapped the anesthetic. Brief burn, he said. He wasn't lying. That needle found the tissue just beneath my cheekbone, and the pain shot upward fast, electric reaching all the way to the rim of my eye socket. Not a sound from me. I had taken 277-volt shocks that flung me off a ladder at a job site in Belmont. Conduit running at 800 degree had left its mark on both forearms at an industrial plant in Kannapolis. A few sutures in an air-conditioned room didn't register on the same scale as any of that. Dr. Bascom stitched, and I fixed my eyes on the ceiling and let the past do what it always does when your body is horizontal and there's nothing left to manage. The first stitch surfaced a memory I keep in a deep place. Carla was 8 years old, a fever that dug in and wouldn't let go. February, the harshest February. Charlotte had seen in 15 years, and we wrapped her in the quilt straight off our bed and drove to the hospital at 2 in the morning because she couldn't stop shaking. Pneumonia. The word dropped into me the way a heavy tool drops sudden wrong with impact. I took a plastic chair outside the pediatric unit, and I did not leave it for 11 hours. No food, no sleep. Lorraine's grip on my hand cut off the circulation to my fingers. To move felt like conceding ground I wasn't prepared to give. When the doctor finally came back out and said she was stable, said she was asking for her dad, I went in and perched on the edge of that narrow bed and held her hand between both of mine, those small fingers against my roughed-up palms. You scared me half to death, little girl, I said. She tilted those big dark eyes up at me. I'm sorry, Daddy. I told her there wasn't a thing in this world she owed me an apology for. The second stitch brought up something different. Carla, at 16, back when she'd spent 3 weeks circling a dress in a department store, catalog a sage green sundress priced at $84. Never breathed a word about wanting it. She'd just leave the catalog where I'd find it, the page turned down, then act as though she'd already moved on. That month, I picked up 3 extra night shifts at a commercial retrofit job in Concord and bought it without mentioning it to anyone. Boxed it and set it on her bed with a card. Happy Tuesday. She came downstairs, eyes gone red, and wrapped her arms around my neck, tight enough that I had to work to pull a breath. She didn't tell me I looked like a janitor back in those days. The third stitch came with graduation. I watched her cross the stage in Boone, from the third row, a paper program folded in my lap. Her name came over the speakers, and something in my throat clenched down so hard I couldn't have produced a single word. Lorene seized my arm with both hands. I held my mouth closed, blinked against it, reminded myself that a 63-year-old man, with grease ground permanently under his fingernails, had no business weeping in a crowd. I was not entirely successful at that. And then there was today, standing on my own floor with blood moving down my collar, looking at my daughter's face and finding nothing there but irritation. Dr. Bascom put down his instruments. 6, he said. Significant bruising by morning, that's what you're looking at. Ice it tonight. Back in 10 days for removal. Understood, I said. He held out a small mirror. I studied the white bandage across the left side of my face. The dried blood still on my collar. Then I met my own eyes in that mirror, and the man looking back wasn't afraid. He had made up his mind. My phone lit up on the exam table. Clifton Abernathy. I answered without hesitation. Your message came through. Clifton said, the same measured, precise tone he always carried. Tell me everything I said. All of it. The bags on the floor, the bedroom demand, the chair, Carla's voice when she said selfish. He let me finish, and then the line went quiet for a moment. 2 years, Clifton said. I've been waiting 2 years for this call. I'll have officers at your house inside the hour. Russ, stay away tonight. I know I told him. I've got somewhere else to be. I set the phone on the counter, pushed to my feet, and took one last look at myself in the mirror. Somewhere across town, Derek Prudhomme was sinking into my leather recliner, drinking my wine, savoring a victory that was going to strip away everything he had built and everything he had helped himself to. He just hadn't figured that out yet. I sat in the cab of my pickup in the Novant Health Pineville parking lot, engine idling, heater on low phone propped against the steering wheel. The bandage tugged at my cheek with every movement of my jaw. Outside, the October sky had faded to the color of old pewter, and the lot lights were already blinking on, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. I opened the security app on my phone. The system I'd put in 6 months ago was commercial grade, the same hardware I used to spec for corporate warehouse facilities and pharmaceutical distribution centers. 8 cameras, razor-sharp, motion-activated, cloud-backed and completely invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. The living room feed came up first. Derek was in my leather recliner shoes, off feet propped on my walnut coffee table, right hand wrapped around one of my crystal glasses, filled with something deep burgundy. I placed the bottle on the side table the moment I saw it. A Willamette Valley Pinot Noir I had been saving for 15 years. A bottle I'd bought the year Lorene and I celebrated paying off the mortgage on our first commercial property. Derek had gone down to my private cellar, helped himself to. It cracked it open, and was sitting there drinking it alone, like a man who just claimed a trophy. Carla stood at the entrance to the hallway phone, out recording the room. She was angling the camera around, tilting her head the way she did in photographs, lips moving. She was putting together a video, showing someone the space, showing off what she believed she had just taken possession of. My chest clenched so hard I had to press my fist flat against my sternum. Then, the red and blue arrived. 3 Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department cruisers pulled up to the house at the same moment, their light bars throwing fractured color across the living room windows. Derek's head snapped up from the recliner. He lurched forward so fast the crystal glass sloshed deep burgundy wine down the front of his shirt. His feet dropped off the table and hit the floor. He stood and straightened his jacket by reflex, which struck me as almost worth a laugh. The man had just put a piece of furniture into a 71-year-old's face, and when the police showed up, his first move was to fix his jacket. 4 officers came through the front door. Even through the muffled audio of the app, their voices cut through sharp, carrying the kind of authority that doesn't open itself up to debate. Derek raised both hands and started talking fast. I couldn't catch every word, but the shape of it was clear enough. Respected, professional, misunderstanding, family matter. He was running the same smooth, polished register he used in boardrooms, the tone that announces, without quite saying it, I am not someone you want to inconvenience. The officers didn't shift their stance by a single degree. Two of them moved around Derek's flanks while he was still mid-sentence. They weren't weighing his vocabulary. They were looking at the blood on the floor, still visible near the dining table, and at the shattered oak pieces stacked against the wall where I had gathered them before leaving. The evidence laid out a version of events that no amount of smooth talking could undo. Derek's expression changed the moment the first officer reached for his arm. Whatever polished surface he'd been presenting dropped away entirely. Pure shock moved across his face. The shock of a man who had never, not once in his adult life, been informed that his words carry no particular weight. "You can't do this," he said, his voice climbing. "Do you have any idea who I am? I am a licensed real estate professional. I have attorneys. I will have your badges by the end of the week." The officer holding his arm said evenly, and without any evident interest, "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." The shock gave way to outright panic. He pulled against the officer's grip, exactly the wrong move, and within seconds, two more officers had him turned around and against the wall. The handcuffs engaged with a sound I felt, before I heard it, a clean metallic click that came through the phone speaker, clearly enough to make my jaw finally stop grinding for the first time in hours. Carla was pressed into the corner of the living room, her phone down at her side, both palms flat against the wall behind her, her face completely drained of color. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't in tears. She was standing there watching her husband get handcuffed in the house. She had announced that very afternoon she was taking over, and she wore the expression of a woman watching the floor give way beneath her. Then she found her voice. "Stop!" She came lurching forward. "Stop! You don't understand. He didn't do anything. This was a family argument. My father provoked him. You cannot arrest a man over a family argument." One of the officers moved smoothly between her and Derek, one hand raised. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." "He is my husband!" Carla cried, her voice cracking high and uneven. "He has a career. He has a reputation. You are going to destroy everything he's built over a misunderstanding." Lorene stepped into the frame. She'd been in the kitchen doorway the entire time, and I hadn't registered her until that moment. She still had the dish towel from earlier. She walked slowly into the center of the room, past the fragments of the broken chair, past the officers, and stood with her arms at her sides, watching Derek being guided toward the front door. No screaming from her, no pleading. Her face was composed and still, and the look in her eyes was one I had only seen once before. The same look she'd fixed on the contractor who tried to short us on materials in 1993, right before she phoned his bonding company and had his license pulled. It was the look of a woman who had already mapped out how this would end. I turned my phone face down on the passenger seat. I shifted into reverse and pulled out of the lot. My cheek throbbed steadily under the bandage. The evening outside had gone full dark and cold. Heading south on the highway toward home, my mind wasn't on Derek in handcuffs. It was on Lorene standing in the center of that room, composed and certain, while everything around her came apart. 45 years of marriage, and she could still manage to surprise me. The kitchen light was burning when I turned into the driveway, warm and yellow behind the window glass. I sat in the truck for a moment and just looked at it. 45 years of pulling into this driveway and seeing that light on. 45 years of walking through that door and finding Lorene somewhere in the house, at the stove, at the table in the armchair by the window, and feeling that particular relief, the kind with no real name, but that you'd recognize in an instant if you ever had it taken from you. I went inside. Lorene was at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her, and a small stack of papers set to one side. Her eyes went straight to the bandage the moment I came through the door. She pressed her lips together, looked away for exactly 1 second, gathering herself, then looked back. "Sit down, Russ," she said. I sat across from her. Without a word, she got up, poured a cup from the pot. She'd kept warm and set it in front of me. Black tea, no sugar, exactly how I'd taken it for 45 years. "How many stitches?" she asked, settling back into her chair. 6, I said. She gave one short nod. "Good doctor. Very good." She wrapped both hands around her mug and looked at me with the expression I had learned to read over decades together, the one that meant she had something to say and was deciding where to begin. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." "All right," I said. Lorene drew a slow breath. 3 weeks ago, when Carla and Derek came for Sunday dinner, Carla used the iPad in the living room to check her email. She left it open on the counter when she went to help carry dishes. Lorene's jaw set. I wasn't looking for anything. I set a glass down, and the screen was right there in front of me. What did you see? I asked. A foreclosure notice. Lorene's voice was flat and steady. From Pinnacle Financial. 6 months of missed mortgage payments on the downtown condo. The bank was moving to seize the property before the end of the month. She paused. There were also 2 emails from an IRS collections department and 1 from a debt resolution attorney. The tea mug was warm between my palms. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't tell you that. Night Lorene went on, her voice dropping slightly the way it did when she was being fully honest about something that had cost her something to carry. Because I knew if I told you, you'd go straight at them, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to be certain. She slid the papers across the table toward me. So, the next morning, I called Clifton. I looked down at the stack. Clifton Abernathy's letterhead across the top, a dense and precise financial summary below it. Derek owes the IRS $1.4 million. Back taxes, penalties, compounding interest. His brokerage accounts are frozen. The condo is gone. He had been fabricating his earnings for at least 4 years, telling clients he was generating returns. He never came close to producing. She pressed her fingertips flat to the table. He is completely broke, Russ. They were on the verge of losing everything. I turned the first page over. Every number was exactly as bad as she'd described. He didn't come here for a city project, I said. No, Lorene said. He came because there was nowhere else left. He intended to push you out and use this house as collateral to buy himself breathing room with the IRS. Her eyes came up and held mine. This wasn't impulsive. Clifton said Derek had someone pull your property records 8 months ago. That hit hard. 8 months. Derek had been working this out while sitting at our Thanksgiving table eating food Lorene had cooked, shaking my hand at the front door on his way out. Did Carla know? I asked. Something moved across Lorene's face, not quite grief, not quite anger, but sitting in the painful territory between the two. I don't know how much she knew, she said carefully. But she knew enough. The kitchen held nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator. Outside the window, the lake was black and perfectly still. Why did you carry this by yourself for 3 weeks? I asked her. Lorene looked down at her mug. Her grip tightened around the ceramic. Because I kept telling myself I had to be wrong, she said quietly. I kept thinking she is our daughter. She would not look at everything we spent our lives building and decide it was something to take. Her voice fractured slightly on that last word, just slightly before she brought it back under control. But then she stood in our living room today and watched you bleed and told you that you were being selfish. Lorene raised her eyes to mine, and they were bright with tears she absolutely refused to release. And I stopped telling myself I was wrong. I reached across and put my hand over hers. Her knuckles were cold and hard, and she gripped my fingers back with the same force she'd used in a hospital waiting room. 23 years ago, when Carla was sick, and we were both hollowed out with fear. Tonight was different. Neither of us was afraid. We were something else entirely. My phone buzzed on the table. I flipped it over. Carla's name on the screen. It rang 4 times, filling the quiet kitchen, then rolled to voicemail. 10 seconds later, it started up again. Lorene looked at the phone, then at me. She is not calling to apologize, she said. I know, I said. I turned it face down and left it there. I had been under maybe 2 hours when the sound started. It was not a knock. Knocking implies asking. What Derek delivered to my front door at 2 in the morning was a sequence of heavy rhythmic impacts, the heel of a boot driving into solid wood, with everything a grown man had over and over each blow, sending a shudder up through the floor joists and into the bed frame beneath me. I didn't reach for the lamp. I picked up the tablet from the nightstand and pulled up the front porch camera. The motion light had tripped and was flooding the porch in hard white. Derek was standing under it in the same clothes he'd had on when the officers walked him out of my house in handcuffs, except now the blazer was badly wrinkled. His collar was open and soiled, his hair dropping across his forehead in a way that told me he'd spent the past several hours in a holding cell and hadn't handled it gracefully. Behind him stood Carla in a long coat, arms folded tight around herself, eyes sweeping the street, checking neighboring windows. Derek drove his boot into the door again. The wood shuddered in the frame. Open this door right now, Russ. He roared into the night, his voice raw and stripped of every polished layer he performed during daylight hours. Open it right now, or I promise you will regret every single decision you made today. Lorene sat up beside me. She didn't gasp. She looked at the tablet in my hands, absorbed what was happening on the porch in about 3 seconds, and turned to me with an expression that was equal parts exhausted and absolutely sure. "He made bail," she said. "Apparently," I said. "How much do you want to bet Carla ran every card she had left to spring him tonight?" Lorene asked. "I would not take that bet," I said. Derek kicked the door again. Then again. He cupped both hands around his mouth and aimed his voice at the bedroom windows above. "You think you can do this to me? I will take everything you own. I will make sure you spend whatever years you have left in a place that smells like a hospital cafeteria. You are nothing, Russ. You are a washed-up old electrician who got lucky, and you are about to find out what happens when luck runs dry." Lorene's jaw set. She reached over and took the tablet from my hands, studied the porch footage for a moment, and passed it back. "He's going to wake the Hendersons," she said, referring to our neighbors 3 houses down, a retired couple in their 70s who had brought us a casserole when Lorene had her knee surgery 2 years ago. "The Hendersons are probably already awake," I said. I pressed the button to confirm the commercial system was actively pushing both audio and video to the cloud server. Every word Derek was shouting into that October night was being captured in high definition with a timestamp on it. I flagged the footage and forwarded it straight to Clifton Abernathy with one-line restraining order, "Tonight if possible." Lorene put her hand on my arm. Not because she was frightened. I knew the difference between the way she touched me when she was scared and the way she touched me when she simply wanted me to know she was there. This was the second one. "Remember that summer she was 14, Lorene said quietly. Her eyes stayed on the tablet, watching Derek pace back and forth below. She snuck out to go to that concert with the Duchesne girl. You sat up until 3 in the morning on the porch waiting for her." I remembered. I'd been furious and sick with worry in equal measure. When Carla's car turned into the driveway at 2:45, I'd walked down those porch steps with my arms crossed and my heart slamming. She had taken one look at my face and broken down immediately, and I had stood there for about 4 seconds, fighting to hold on to the anger before I pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than either of us would ever acknowledge out loud. I didn't say any of that, but it settled in my chest like something heavy. Below Derek had shifted registers entirely. The threats gave way to something closer to pleading, ragged, desperate, shot through with the panic of a man who had finally registered that the ground had left his feet. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice fracturing. "I have a career. I have a reputation. People know who I am in this city. If this gets out, if this ends up on my record, I am finished. You are ending me over a bedroom, over one room." Carla stepped up on the porch and grabbed his arm. "Derek, stop!" she hissed. "You are making this worse. The neighbors." "I don't care about the neighbors," he snapped, pulling free of her. "Well, I do," she fired back. After 22 minutes by the tablet clock, Derek seized Carla by the arm and dragged her toward the leased SUV, sitting at the curb. He threw the car into gear and floored it, the engine roar splitting the stillness like a gunshot, then tore out of sight. Twin black skid marks scorched into the concrete where he'd stood. The porch light died. The block settled back into silence. Lorene let out a long, slow breath next to me. "He'll be back," she said. "Maybe not tonight, but he'll come back swinging something harder." "I know," I said. I put the tablet on the nightstand and sank into the pillow. "He's burned through his easy options. Whatever comes next, it won't be pretty." Lorene didn't say anything for a moment. Beyond the glass, Lake Wiley had dissolved completely into the night, but I could feel it out there, still and flat and patient, the way it always was before dawn. Russ, Lorene said. "Yeah. Whatever he tries next," she said, "we'll be ready." I reached over in the dark until I found her hand. "We've been ready for 45 years, I told her. Clifton Abernathy appeared at my door at exactly 8 so in the morning. That was no surprise. 17 years, working alongside the man, had taught me 2 things about him. He was never late, and he never walked through a door without having already done the homework. His silver sedan rolled to a stop in my driveway, and he climbed out wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been pressed an hour ago. A leather briefcase in hand, one I knew held a portable scanner, 2 encrypted hard drives, and enough legal ammunition to make a federal judge sit up straight. Lorene had coffee waiting. She slid a mug across to Clifton the second he took his seat at the kitchen table. He acknowledged it with a short nod, then went straight for the briefcase. No pleasantries, no warming up. That was the quality I respected most in Clifton Abernathy. He didn't perform warmth he wasn't feeling. Every bit of his energy went into the work, and the work never disappointed. He pushed a manila folder across the table toward me. In any real sense of the word, your son-in-law is not a real estate professional. Clifton said, both hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Technically, he holds a license, but no legitimate transaction has closed under his name in 14 months. What he's actually been doing is running one desperate investment scheme after another, charging clients fees for properties he had no control over, then patching the shortfalls with money from whoever signed on next. He let that sit. Under federal law, that's wire fraud. I flipped the folder open. The top sheet was the foreclosure notice Lorene had already told me about, the word foreclosure stamped across it in red that left no room for argument. Pinnacle Financial Group was taking the downtown Charlotte condominium. The clock on that process had been running for 4 months and was almost out of time. They've been delinquent on that mortgage for 6 months, Clifton went on. 3 years ago, they bought the condo for $1.1 million on an adjustable rate mortgage. Once the rate reset, Derek's monthly payment climbed to $200. He couldn't make it work, so he told Carla it was a renovation project. That's correct, Clifton said. He also told her the money was coming from a bonus, a big commercial deal he'd supposedly closed in the spring. No such deal exists. Lorene set her mug down on the table, a touch harder than the moment called for. The IRS matter is entirely separate and a good deal uglier, Clifton said, moving to the next page. Derek has submitted fraudulent returns for at least 4 years running. In the years where inflated income helped him borrow money, he overstated it. In the years he owed, he shrunk the numbers. The total outstanding back taxes, penalties, interest, compounding on top of interest, comes to $1.4 million. Federal mandate froze his personal accounts 6 weeks ago. I worked through the next page, then the one after. There's nothing liquid, Clifton said. The car is a lease. The furniture in that condo is financed. The suits, the watch, every restaurant tab, the vacation they were photographing themselves on. In July, all of it has been charged to credit cards that are sitting at or past their limits. He held my gaze across the table. When Derek showed up at your door yesterday afternoon, demanding your bedroom, his one account that wasn't frozen held approximately $400. That was the full picture. The kitchen held no sound at all except a jay somewhere beyond the window, cutting loose with that hard, relentless call, utterly unbothered by what was unraveling in this room. He planned this. I didn't make it a question. 8 months ago, somebody using Derek's personal email requested a title search and a property valuation on this address, Clifton said. Paid for with a personal card. I have the transaction records in hand. He laid another sheet on the table between us. Before he ever darkened your doorstep yesterday, he knew exactly what this house was worth. He needed something he could move fast, sell it, or leverage it to keep the IRS off him and out of criminal court. Your home was the whole strategy. Lorene pushed back her chair and stood. She crossed the kitchen to the window and faced the glass, both palms flat on the counter's edge, staring out toward the water. Her shoulders had gone rigid, and the steadiness of her breathing told me she was holding something enormous back by sheer will. Carla, she said, barely above a whisper, still not turning. Did she know how bad it really was? I can't make that call with any certainty, Clifton said, choosing his words. What I can tell you is that she was on those same joint accounts Derek was. She would have seen what the balances looked like. She would have seen the overdraft notifications. Lorene turned from the window. Her eyes were dry, but something around them had gone taut. She had to know they were drowning, she said. Maybe not the exact figures, but she knew. Clifton gave one short nod. I sat there looking at the pile of documents spread in front of me. 42 years of hauling myself through attic crawl spaces and threading wire through conduit in the dead of winter. 42 years of early alarms and days that stretched to 12 hours coming home with the smell of job sites baked into my clothes, while Derek Prudhomme pumped my hand at Christmas dinners and wiped his palm clean on a napkin the moment I let go. For 8 months, he'd been circling this property the way a thief circles a target before he moves. So what's the play, I asked. Clifton pulled a second folder from the briefcase slimmer than the first. He placed it over the financial documents and pressed one finger down on it. We wait for him to move, Clifton said. Because he will. Someone facing what he's facing doesn't walk away from last night and decide it's over. He'll make another run at you, and when that happens, I intend to answer it in a way he can't recover from. He looked at me without blinking. Russ, I need you to let the process run and not go after him yourself. Can you hold to that? I've held my patience for 45 years, I said. A few more days won't break me. Something moved at the corner of Clifton's mouth, the nearest thing to a smile I'd ever seen from him. He was gathering his briefcase when the phone in his jacket rang. He checked the screen. His expression changed, not dramatically, but noticeably, like a shade being drawn. He put the phone to his ear, listened for roughly 15 seconds, then looked up at me with eyes a few degrees colder than before. "That was the chief of police," Clifton said. "He wants to see you in person this morning." Chief Ray Duchesne and I went back 16 years. We'd first crossed paths at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in 2008 when I was still managing active sites, and he was a newly minted captain with a handshake you could trust. 4 years on the same neighborhood safety board together. His wife had baked Lorene's lemon pound cake recipe every Christmas since Lorene passed it along at a block party in 2014, and every year a loaf arrived at our door bundled in foil with a card reading, "Thank you for the original." The man who knocked on my front door at 9:30 that morning was not wearing the face I was used to seeing on him. He stood on the porch holding his hat with both hands, weight eased back on his heels, the stance of someone delivering news he'd rather not be carrying. I swung the door open and met his eyes. "Ray," I said. "Russ." His gaze moved briefly past me, to where Clifton stood in the kitchen doorway, briefcase in hand, and something in the chief's face shifted a quiet recalibration. "I need a few minutes with you." "Come on in," I said. We took seats at the kitchen table. Lorene filled a cup for the chief. Without waiting to be asked, that was simply who she was, and he took it in both hands and rested it on the table untouched. Carla walked into the precinct first thing this morning. He started speaking slowly, each word placed with care, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this, and still wasn't sure it was enough. She went to the magistrate on duty and filed a formal sworn statement. "Russ, she is claiming that you have advanced dementia." He paused there and held my gaze, making certain the words were landing. "She told the magistrate you'd been suffering severe episodes of paranoia and confusion for months. Her account of the injury to your face was that you put it there yourself, that you threw yourself into the chair on purpose to manufacture an assault charge against Derek that had no basis in fact." The kitchen didn't move. Lorene made a sound small and sharp, the kind that escapes before you can catch it, like someone pressing a thumb into a wound. Her hand went flat over her mouth for 2 seconds, then came back down. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were on fire. "She is filing for emergency guardianship." Chief Duchesne continued, his voice falling a register. "Over your person, your property, and everything you own. The petition states that you are no longer fit to manage your own life, and that without immediate action, you pose a danger to yourself and to others." He let out a slow breath. "I'm required to bring this to you, Russ. I also want you to know I didn't come here because I believe any part of it. I came because you are my friend, and this news ought to reach you from someone who gives a damn about you." I held Chief Duchesne's eyes for a moment. Then I looked at Lorene. Her expression had moved past burning and settled into something colder and harder and more resolute than I'd seen from her in a long time. Then I looked at Clifton, who had already put down his mug and was back into the briefcase. "Ray." Clifton said his name, his voice shifting into that particular register it took on when he was moving into full professional mode, smooth and completely immovable. "I'm Clifton Abernathy, Mr. Haney's attorney of record. Before we go any further, I'd like to put something in front of you." He drew a document from the briefcase and placed it in front of the chief. "That is a full cognitive and neurological evaluation, completed by Dr. Renata Prewitt at Novant Health 26 days ago. It was part of Russ's annual life insurance renewal physical. Dr. Prewitt is board certified in neurology and has been practicing in Charlotte for 21 years. Clifton set one finger on the page. Russ's cognitive scores put him in the 91st percentile for his age group. His memory, executive function, and processing speed are, in the doctor's own words, remarkable for a man of any age. Chief Duchesne lifted the document and read through it. The relief that moved across his face as he turned each page was genuine and visible, something he made no effort to conceal. Lorene leaned forward in her chair. When she spoke, her voice was low and precise and sharpened to a point that made the chief look up at once. "Ray, I have been married to this man for 45 years, she said. "Every morning for 45 years, I've sat across the breakfast table from him. I know his mind the way I know my own hands. If Russell Haney had dementia, I would have seen it long before any doctor named it. What Carla filed this morning has nothing to do with worry over her father." Lorene's voice dropped another degree. It is a financial assault dressed up to look like concern, and I need you to see it for what it is." Chief Duchesne set the document down and looked at Lorene, the way you look at someone who has just said the precise thing that needed saying in exactly the way it needed to be said. "I see it clearly, Lorene," he said quietly. He picked his hat up off the table and got to his feet. He shook Clifton's hand, then reached for mine and held it a beat longer than a formal handshake required. "With this documentation, the petition is dead on arrival," he said, nodding toward the medical evaluation. "I'll see to it that the magistrate has a copy before noon." He gave me one last look before turning for the door. "Russ, keep your eyes open. This won't be the last move they make." "I know," I said. After the front door clicked shut, the three of us sat together in the kind of quiet that settles in after bad news has been delivered and gone. Lorene got up and drifted back to the kitchen window, looking out over the water. Her spine was straight, her arms at her sides, nothing clenched. From the way her shoulders were set, I could see that the tears she'd refused since yesterday were still being refused. She used the word dementia. Lorene said barely enough voice to carry across the room. She stood before a magistrate and swore on paper that her own father threw himself into a chair. She turned around slowly. Her eyes were dry and absolutely devastating. "Russ, she didn't do that out of desperation. That was deliberate." She sat down, thought it through, decided it was her best option, and went through with it. There was nothing I could say to that. Nothing that would make it hurt any less. My phone buzzed against the table. I flipped it over and looked at the screen. The name staring back at me was the last one I would have predicted seeing that afternoon. 3 days after Chief Duchesne sat at my kitchen table and told me my daughter had gone before a magistrate and sworn I was losing my mind. The doorbell rang on a Thursday afternoon. I checked the security camera feed on my phone before I got up from the armchair. Carla was on the front porch by herself. No Derek, no lawyer, just my daughter, in a plain gray sweater and dark jeans, hair pulled back in a loose knot, her face stripped of the careful makeup she usually wore, like a second skin. She looked smaller than I remembered, younger, worn through somehow, less than the version of herself she usually put forward the way a person looks when they've been hauling something heavy in silence for too long. She had a glass baking dish in both hands covered in aluminum foil. I set my phone on the side table and walked to the door. The moment I opened it, Carla's eyes went straight to the bandage on my cheek. Her face gave way. Her chin shook, her shoulders curved inward, and she pressed her lips together in that particular way that means someone is fighting to keep from coming apart and losing. "Dad," she said, and the single word cracked open completely. "Oi, Dad, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry. I lost my mind. I was scared and overwhelmed, and I let Derek push me into things I never should have gone along with. And I know that is not an excuse. I know it is not, but I need you to know that I am sorry for every single thing that happened in this house." She was crying without restraint now, tears moving freely down her face, her breathing broken and uneven. I stepped back from the door. She came inside. She went straight to the kitchen and lowered the baking dish onto the counter with both hands the way you reach for something solid when you need to anchor yourself. She pulled back the foil. The smell reached me before anything else. Warm, sweet layered brown sugar and cinnamon up front and underneath it, something richer, a thread of nutmeg that I would have known with my eyes closed anywhere. It was Lorene's peach cobbler, exactly right. The buttery lattice had gone a perfect deep gold at the edges, and the filling pressed up through the gaps in slow, bubbling pools, and the whole kitchen smelled the way it had smelled on every birthday of mine for the past 30 years. Lorene appeared in the doorway behind me. She looked at the cobbler, then she looked at Carla. Her face was still and careful, the expression of someone reading every line of a situation before they commit to a word. "I was thinking about Mom all night," Carla said, dragging the back of her hand across her cheek. She looked between the two of us, her eyes red and raw. "I kept thinking about how she made this for you, Dad. Every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every time you came home, beat up from a hard stretch of work. And I thought about how she would feel right now, if she could see what I did, what we did, and I could not stop crying." She reached into her bag and set a folded document on the kitchen table. Her hand wasn't steady. "I printed this out. It is a family reconciliation agreement. Derek is willing to go to anger management. He is deeply ashamed. This document just formally states that we have reached a private settlement and that you are requesting the charges be dropped. If you sign it, we can put all of this behind us. We can be a family again." I looked at the document, Then I looked at Carla. Then I looked at Lorene standing in the doorway, her eyes giving me nothing and everything at the same moment. I walked to the table slowly. I took my reading glasses from my shirt pocket and made a deliberate production of cleaning the lenses on the hem of my flannel shirt before settling them on my nose. I bent over the document and studied it with the careful squint of a man whose eyes aren't quite what they used to be. What I'm about to share with you is the moment I understood how deep this had actually gone, and how far someone can fall when they've been lying, not just to the people around them, but to themselves. Before we get there, I want to ask you something. If someone close to you was quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and let them finish showing you exactly who they are? There was nothing wrong with my eyes. Every word on that page took me under 45 seconds to process. I clocked the format the instant I saw it. The cover sheet announced a family reconciliation and settlement agreement. What was actually underneath that cover sheet was a durable financial power of attorney one that would hand Carla unchecked authority over every account, every portfolio, every parcel of property that bore my name. She hadn't driven over here to mend anything. This was about completing what Derek had come to do. I eased myself upright and pushed out a long, slow exhale, the kind a man releases when the fight has finally gone out of him. "You're right, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft, a little frail at the edges. "Your mother would hate seeing us this way. All I want is for this to be over." I slipped my hand into my breast pocket and pulled out a pen, a black ballpoint bought 2 years back from a novelty shop in Blowing Rock as a joke gift for one of my crew foremen, a fellow named Gary, with a lifelong habit of borrowing pens and returning absolutely none of them. To the naked eye, the ink it laid down on paper was indistinguishable from any other. The chemistry of it, though, was the point full evaporation within 2 hours of hitting open air. No trace, no impression, nothing left behind at all. I uncapped it, set the tip against the signature line. My hand shook a little, not something I was proud to perform, but there was no way around it. Then I wrote out my full legal name, Russell Dale Haney, in slow, deliberate cursive along the bottom of that fraudulent document. The second the final letter was down, everything in the room shifted. Carla's crying stopped dead. Not a gradual fade, a switch thrown. Whatever grief had been on her face drained away in an instant, replaced by something efficient, almost mechanical. Her hand shot across the table and scooped up the document before the pen had even left the page. 2 crisp folds dropped into her bag. Done. No word of gratitude. No embrace either. She pivoted and moved through the kitchen, through the living room, right out the front door, no backward glance at any point. Lorene and I stood there in the silence that followed, tracking the sound of her engine turning over and fading down the street. Lorene moved to the counter and stood over the peach cobbler looking down at it. Her lips went tight together. Her voice when it came was low and absolutely measured. She used the nutmeg. "Russ," Lorene said, "I never put that in writing. I showed her one time right here in this kitchen. She was 9 years old up on a step stool." She raised her eyes to mine, and they were bright and heartbroken and blazing all at once. "She brought her mother's recipe into this house and used it on her own father. She turned that cobbler into a tool." I wrapped an arm around Lorene's shoulders. She leaned against me for 3 seconds, present and solid and warm. Then she pulled herself back upright, ran the back of her wrist across her eyes, and met my gaze without flinching. "Is the signature already gone? Give it 2 hours, I said. That line will be completely clean." I wasn't anywhere near First Piedmont Bank that afternoon. I was out on the back porch with a mug of black tea on the side table, and the October sun burning low across the lake, watching 2 geese trace a slow path along the far bank. But Clifton reached me by phone 40 minutes after Carla walked out of my kitchen and laid out everything that happened. Then 2 days on, when the bank handed over the security footage as part of the formal fraud file, I pulled it up on my laptop at the kitchen table and watched it start to finish, Lorene standing behind me the whole time, one hand resting on my shoulder. So I can tell you exactly what went down. Derek and Carla pushed through the doors of First Piedmont Bank at 4:17 in the afternoon. Derek had on a crisp suit navy, well cut, the sort that reads sharp on a camera, and he was carrying himself the way he always did when he wanted a room to feel his presence, shoulders squared, chin forward, the bearing of a man who considers waiting in lines beneath him. Carla walked at his side in a wool coat, her bag pulled close to her body, her jaw carrying the tight, locked-in expression of someone who has crossed a line and is keeping their eyes forward so they don't have to look back at it. They bypassed the teller stations without slowing and went straight to the private banking desk. The associate asked about an appointment. Derek said one wasn't necessary. He requested the branch manager by name, which told me he'd gone in prepared and announced it was urgent and time-sensitive. 2 words Derek wielded the way some men use a boot heel against a door that won't open on its own. Garrett Hollins stepped out of his office 2 minutes later. Garrett was 42 years old, lean, composed in a charcoal suit with a pocket square that matched his lapel pin exactly. The steadiness behind his eyes was the kind that accumulates across 2 decades of watching people attempt to move money in directions it was never authorized to go. He greeted Derek, greeted Carla, and walked them both into his private office with a face that gave nothing away. What Derek had no idea about, because men built the way Derek was built don't bother learning the histories of people they consider beneath them, was the connection between Garrett Hollins and the old electrician whose life's work he was trying to empty out. 18 years back, Garrett was a 24-year-old, grinding through his second year at Queen's University of Charlotte on a patchwork of loans and a part-time shift at a building supply warehouse on the east side of town. His mother had just lost her job at the textile plant, where she'd clocked in for 19 years. Nobody's fault. Didn't matter whose fault it was. The math was the math. Garrett was going to have to walk away from school. I came through that warehouse 2 or 3 times, most weeks picking up commercial materials. I'd watch Garrett at the register plenty of times, always a textbook prop beside the cash drawer, always reading the moment foot traffic slowed. One February evening, I came in and found him sitting on a drywall pallet in the back aisle, face buried in both hands. I asked what was wrong. He told me. I drove home and sat with Lorene at the kitchen table for 20 minutes, talking it through. The next morning, I walked back in, carrying a certified check drawn on my business account, $40,000. Enough to cover his remaining tuition, his book's a livable apartment for the next 2 years. Garrett pushed it back toward me. His hands weren't steady, and his voice was worse, and he kept insisting he couldn't take it, that he'd repay every cent that he had to. I told him the repayment I was after had nothing to do with money. Finish the degree. Get somewhere you can look after people. Make sure the kind of person who doesn't know how to defend themselves never gets cleaned out by someone who does. That was all I asked. He had honored every word of that. He'd built his way up through First Piedmont Bank with the kind of quiet, deliberate focus I respected every time his name appeared on my quarterly statements. He held the full map of my accounts and my trusts. He understood exactly what Russell Haney had spent 42 years assembling, and his loyalty to me ran bone-deep, unspoken, unshaken, and never once called upon until that afternoon. Derek dropped into the chair across from Garrett and skipped straight to the point. We need a cashier's check for $200 to $1,000 pulled from Russell Haney's primary savings account, Derek said, setting the folded document on the desk and nudging it across with 2 fingers. My father-in-law has signed over full financial authority to us. Documentation is right in front of you. This needs to be handled today. Garrett lifted the document. He opened it, slowly pressed it flat against the desk surface and read header first, then the body, then down to the signature line at the bottom. He held there for a moment, then he rotated it and pushed it back across the desk. I'm sorry for the difficulty, Garrett said, his tone unhurried and professionally even. But I'm not able to process this request. The signature field on this document is empty. Something moved across Derek's face. That isn't possible, he said. My wife personally watched her father put his signature on that document this afternoon, in his own kitchen, with his own pen. I don't doubt it, Garrett replied, pleasant as before. But there is no signature on this line. A power of attorney that carries no valid signature cannot be executed under North Carolina law. I'm not in a position to release funds of this amount against an instrument that isn't properly signed. Carla snatched the document from Derek's side of the desk and stared at the bottom of the page. The color drained from her face entirely. She flipped it over. She angled it toward the office light. She dragged her thumbnail across the signature line, as though the ink might be tucked beneath some invisible layer she hadn't found yet. He signed it, she said, her voice climbing fast. I was standing right there. I watched him take the pen and put his name on it. I saw the ink go down. It was there. The line is blank, Garrett said. Derek came up out of his chair so fast it shot backward and struck the wall. He drove both palms onto Garrett's desk and brought his face to within roughly 14 inches of Garrett's, which didn't move an inch. "You did something to it," Derek said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "You doctored the desk, or you swapped the document. You're covering for that old man, and I want to know who told you to interfere with a legitimate financial transaction." Garrett eased back in his chair by a fraction and moved one hand beneath the edge of the desk. "Mr. Prudhomme," he said, the pleasant tone gone replaced by something considerably more deliberate. "Attempting to execute an unsigned legal instrument against a senior citizen's accounts is something I'm obligated to report. Adding threats against a bank officer while doing it makes this substantially worse." He pressed the button under the desk. "I'd ask you both to stay where you are." The magnetic locks on the main doors engaged with a sound like a vault ceiling shut. The security display above the teller stations went red. 2 guards moved into position in front of the office door. Carla spun toward the glass wall and saw them, and made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob, high and frightened and entirely unperformed. Derek's hands were trembling against the desk surface. I was out on the back porch when Clifton called to tell me it was finished. The geese were still working their way along the far side of the lake. The coffee had gone cold in my hand. I looked at the water and felt something settle quietly into place deep in my chest, the way a heavy door sounds when it finally swings flush and latches. I'd noticed the car the night before, a silver sedan parked 2 houses down on the opposite side of the street engine, off, no lights running. In my neighborhood on a Wednesday evening in October, that vehicle didn't belong. I logged the plate number on my phone and forwarded it to Clifton before I turned in. By morning, it hadn't moved. I was on my second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang at 9:45. I checked the security camera on my tablet before I went anywhere near the door. A man I didn't know was on the front porch navy blazer over a gray shirt. No tie, clipboard tucked under one arm, wearing the expression I'd seen before on building inspectors and a certain breed of salesman. The expression that says, "I belong here, and you'll find it less trouble not to push back." Derek's car was visible in the front camera's rear angle, parked at the far end of my block. I told Lorene quietly, who was standing outside, and what I figured was coming. She looked at me for exactly 2 seconds. Then she crossed to the kitchen drawer, opened it, and handed me the small digital recorder I'd put there 2 nights earlier in anticipation of precisely this kind of visit. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. I was fully within my legal rights to record any conversation I was part of without informing the other person. I hit record before I touched the door handle. The man on the porch was around 50, silver hair, combed back from a broad forehead, with the slightly over-polished look of someone who invested more in his appearance than in what lay behind it. He raised the clipboard to show me a printed form carrying what appeared to be an official county seal. "I'm looking for Mr. Haney," he said, his voice carrying the flat, impersonal authority of someone who delivers institutional news for a living. "My name is Dr. Vernon Sweat. I'm here on behalf of the Mecklenburg County Adult Protective Services Division to conduct a state-mandated cognitive wellness evaluation. Your family has filed a formal concern regarding your ability to safely manage your own affairs. I'm legally required to complete this assessment today. If you decline to cooperate, I'm authorized to contact the county to initiate an involuntary evaluation hold." He was not from Mecklenburg County Adult Protective Services. Clifton had already confirmed that no such visit had been scheduled or cleared by any county agency. The seal on that clipboard was an impressive copy, but it was still a copy. Dr. Vernon Sweat was a formerly licensed psychiatrist whose medical license had been pulled in Tennessee 3 years earlier after a complaint over falsified patient records. Derek had gone looking for him in whatever part of the internet shelters people willing to do dishonest work for cash. I said none of that. I stepped aside and waved him in, moving at an old man's pace with an expression that read, slightly unsure, the look of someone who finds unexpected visitors a little destabilizing. Lorene appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, fixed Sweat with the same look she reserved for contractors who showed up without calling first, then pulled back without a word. I heard her moving toward the far end of the house. Sweat settled himself at the kitchen table with the ease of a man accustomed to owning whatever room he occupies. He unpacked his clipboard with studied precision, several printed assessment forms, a pen bearing a small university logo on the clip that I was fairly sure he'd picked up specifically for moments like this one. His eyes made a slow circuit of my kitchen, the worn work boots by the back door, the faded flannel jacket on the hook, the plain mugs lined up on the counter. I I watched his posture soften by a degree, settling into something more comfortable and a little dismissive. He had already made up his mind about what I was, Mr. Haney. He said, pacing each word the way people do when they've decided the person across from them needs extra time to keep up. I want you to understand that this evaluation is entirely routine, nothing to worry about. We're just going to have a conversation, and I'll ask you a few straightforward questions. Does that sound all right? Of course, I said. I let my voice come out a little thin, the voice of a man who doesn't have much left in reserve. Can you tell me what today's date is? Wednesday, at the bull receives. I creased my brow and looked toward the window. Thursday, I said, carefully. October, I think. I let a pause stretch out. 2013. Sweat made a note on his form. And can you tell me who the current president of the United States is? I gave him a name that had been wrong for well over a decade, delivered with the serene confidence of someone who has no idea he's mistaken. More writing. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I started right, dropped off at 86, pressed 2 fingers against my temple, and said the pain behind my eyes was making it hard to hold the numbers. Sweat nodded slowly, and an expression of vast, barely contained satisfaction spread across his face, the look of a man collecting exactly what he was hired to produce. He settled back in his chair and let the professional mask slip just enough. A slow head shake, a small sound under his breath that was nearly a laugh. Derek told me exactly what to expect, he said almost to himself, tapping his pen against the clipboard. You are completely gone, friend. You don't even know what year it is. This is going to be the most straightforward $10,000 I have made in a very long time. The kitchen held no sound. The digital recorder positioned beneath the lip of the table was capturing every syllable in high fidelity. I kept my gaze on the tabletop and held my expression loose and vacant and far away, while somewhere behind my ribs something cold and precise clicked into alignment, the last tumbler of a lock finding its position. Sweat closed his folder, pushed back his chair, smoothed his blazer, and announced he would be filing his report with the appropriate state agencies immediately, and that I should expect to hear from them within 72 hours regarding placement in a suitable care facility. He let himself out. I listened to his footsteps cross the porch and take the front steps down. The instant the door clicked shut, I sat up straight. I reached under the table, pulled out the recorder, and stopped it. I walked to my desk, moved the audio file onto my laptop, attached it to an encrypted message, and sent it directly to Clifton Abernathy. My note was 4 words: add bribery, use everything. Lorene came back to the kitchen doorway, arms folded, eyes sharp. Did you get it? Every word, she asked. He said Derek's name out loud. He named the amount, right there in my kitchen. Lorene let the breath out through her nose. Good, she said. 2 syllables flat and final, carrying the particular satisfaction of a woman who has held her patience a long, long time and just watched it pay off. Then let Clifton finish it. The file landed at 11:43 in the morning, routed through Clifton's encrypted server to my desktop in the small office off the hallway, the room I'd used for contracts and business correspondence for the better part of 20 years. The place smelled of old paper, and the faint machine oil warmth of the portable heater in the corner, and the single window looked out on the side yard, where the oak I'd planted the year we moved in had grown tall enough by now to throw the room into shade by mid-morning. I opened it. Clifton had attached a cover note, 3 sentences, which was more than he typically wrote. It read, "The audio recording of Sweat is clean and will be submitted as evidence of criminal bribery and conspiracy to commit fraud. What follows is more urgent. Read it carefully before you decide what to do." I read it carefully. Derek had been moving money, not the funds sitting in his frozen domestic accounts, those were already stripped bare, but a separate current of transfers that Clifton's forensic accounting contact had tracked down through a combination of financial surveillance tools and subpoenaed banking records. Over the past 6 weeks, Derek had been pushing money through a chain of transactions dressed up to resemble ordinary business expenses until it settled into 2 freshly incorporated shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The figures weren't enormous in the landscape of serious financial crime. Together, they came to just under $300,000, but the destination was entirely illegal. The routing had been deliberately obfuscated, and anyone who understood what Derek's domestic situation looked like could read the intention clearly enough. He was building himself a lifeboat before the water reached the deck. What turned my stomach was the next page. Derek hadn't put his own name on the Cayman accounts. He'd used Carla's. Her digital signature appeared on the account's establishment documents, forged from a copy he'd presumably pulled from their shared banking records. Her name sat as primary account holder on both shell corporations. Her social security number showed up on the tax identification filings, from where federal investigators would be standing, and the file made clear they would be standing there. Carla would look like the person who built the whole operation. Derek was using my daughter as a human shield. I sat in that office chair a long time after I finished reading. The oak outside the window shifted in a slow breeze, its last leaves catching the thin October light and burning copper. Down the hall, I could hear Lorene in the kitchen, the low murmur of the radio she ran, while she cooked a station that played old country from the 70s and 80s. I thought about the night Carla was born 40 years ago, in a delivery room at Mercy General Hospital. I had held her for the first time when she was 40 minutes old, and made a promise to her that I had never put into words for anyone, not even Lorene. The promise was simply that I would not let anything harm her. If I could stop it, that I would stand between her and whatever the world meant to throw at her for as long as I was on my feet. She had tested that promise severely these past several days. But Derek forging her signature on offshore accounts was not her error. That was something done to her without her knowing, by a man who had concluded his own survival was worth sacrificing hers. He was prepared to leave my daughter exposed to federal wire fraud charges, federal money laundering charges, the possibility of prison, all to buy himself a few months and a few $100,000. I got up and walked down the hall to the kitchen. Lorene was at the stove. She turned when she heard me and read my face the instant she saw it, the way she had always been able to, with the precision of someone who has spent 45 years studying the same person. "Sit down," she said, and turned the burner to low. I sat. I walked her through everything in the file. I watched her face move through things in order, shock first, then fury, then something that settled into a cold, unblinking clarity I recognized as the version of Lorene that does not bend. "He forged her name," Lorene said. "He put her on those accounts without a word to her." "Yes," I said. "To cover himself." "Yes." Lorene looked at the wall for a moment. Then she turned back to me. Her voice didn't waver. "Russ, if you don't act on this, she goes to federal prison. Not him, her, because her name is on everything." "I know," I said. "Then you know what has to happen. You have to make it clear in the filing that she had no knowledge of any of this. You have to cut her loose from him before the whole thing lands." I nodded. I thought about Carla standing in my living room 4 days ago, working her false tears, carrying a fraudulent power of attorney in her bag, deploying her mother's cobbler to soften a father she had decided was too old and too slow to see what was being done to him. And I thought about Derek sitting somewhere at that moment, running his calculations, entirely willing to hand his own wife a federal indictment to preserve $300,000 for himself. I went back to the desk. I pulled up the IRS Criminal Investigation Division whistleblower portal on my encrypted browser and built the submission package with care, attaching every piece of documentation. Clifton had provided the routing numbers, the wire transfer logs, the Shell Corporation registrations. At the end, I added a clear and specifically documented notation stating that the digital signature of Carla Haney Prudhomme on these accounts had been forged without her knowledge or consent, and that the sole directing party behind these transfers was Derek Prudhomme. I made sure she was protected before I burned the rest of it down. I went through the package one final time. Then I moved the cursor to the submit button and sat with it there for exactly 3 seconds, thinking about the promise I had made in a delivery room 40 years ago. Protecting her did not always look the way she would have chosen. Sometimes it looked like this. I clicked submit. My phone rang 30 seconds later. "Derek, what I'm about to tell you is the moment everything either fell apart or came together. And even now, I'm not entirely sure which it was." Derek's voice on the phone was not the voice of the man who had stood in my living room 10 days earlier, shoulders squared, chin up, running, charm and contempt in equal measure, like someone who had spent a lifetime hearing yes and saw no reason to expect anything different. The voice coming through the phone now was something rarer and far less composed. It was the voice of a man at the edge of a very long drop, looking straight down. "I need to meet with you," he said. "Today. Just the two of us, no lawyer, no Carla. Only you and me, Russ. There's something I need to show you, and I think once you've seen it, you'll want to sit down and talk." I told him where I was willing to go. He gave me an address. The office was tucked into a commercial strip on the south side of Charlotte, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a nail salon in a low-slung building, with a worn awning and a parking lot that hadn't been resurfaced in years. The kind of space that gets rented by the month by people who need to project more than they can actually afford. I pulled my truck into a spot between a rusted sedan and a van with a cracked windshield and sat for a moment looking at the building. Clifton had rung me twice on the drive over. I'd picked up both times and said the same thing each time. I know what I'm doing. Trust me. I went in. Derek was already seated at the conference table, one of 3 mismatched chairs around a veneer surface peeling at one corner. He looked wrecked. The suit on his back was the same one he'd been wearing the night they arrested him, and no amount of pressing had put it right again. The shadows under his eyes had gone deep enough to look bruised, and there was a tremor in his right hand that he was working to keep me from noticing. The smirk was still there, though. Some things run too deep to disappear, even when the rest of a man is coming apart. "Sit down, Russ," he said. I sat. He took out his phone, opened a video file, and turned the screen toward me. I watched it. The footage had been pulled from my own living room security system. He must have caught me entering the access code on my phone the afternoon he first showed up, standing close enough behind me in the hallway that it hadn't occurred to me to shield the screen. I'd changed every password the night he was arrested, but by that point, he'd already taken what he needed. The edit work on the footage was more skilled than I would have expected from him. Every frame of him hoisting and throwing that oak chair had been scrubbed out. What he'd left behind was a tight loop. My arm coming up, then a hard cut to Carla, pitching sideways, catching the wall with her shoulder after tripping over one of the duffel bags. Strip away those missing 15 seconds and the clip told one story only, that I had thrown my own daughter across the room. Tonight at 7:00, WCNC gets this. WBTV gets this. Every neighbor on your street gets this. Derek's voice had climbed back towards something steady now, that he had leverage he could actually hold in his hand. What I tell them is simple. You went after your daughter in the middle of a dementia episode. By the time the sun comes up tomorrow, everyone in Lake Wiley who's ever heard the name Russell Haney will know exactly what you are. He let it settle. Unless what? I said. He pushed a document across the table toward me. Quit claim deed, he said, the words coming out smooth and rehearsed. The Lake Wiley property goes straight to Carlo and me. No trust layered on top, no conditions buried in the fine print, no corporate wrapper around it. Your name on that line, and we're gone from your life permanently. He dropped his weight onto his elbows. You've got money put away, I'd bet on it. Go find a facility that suits you. Pick up a condo in Hilton Head. Spend whatever years you've got left without any of this noise. But if you won't sign, I give you my word. The next 30 years of your life are going to be one long apology tour for what you did to your daughter. He eased back into his chair, arms folded, wearing the face of someone who is certain he has already won. I studied the quitclaim deed lying there between us. What Derek had no idea about, and what the attorney he'd found in that strip mall had clearly never thought to verify before drafting, this was the particular legal character of the Lake Wiley property. 3 years back, after Lorene suggested we tighten our structure following a big push in our commercial contracts, Clifton and I had gone through the process with federal regulators to formally designate a portion of the land as a licensed staging and transit zone for regulated industrial electrical materials, high-voltage transformer components, dielectric fluid containers, specialized insulation compounds that our crews needed in a central location between job sites across the state. All of it was above board, fully permitted, and bound directly to my corporate entity. It was also sitting in the public record, filed with the county clerk, visible to the relevant federal agencies, accessible to any attorney willing to pull a basic title and zoning search before telling a client to take a direct personal transfer of this deed. Derek's attorney had never pulled that search. The instant someone absorbed an unshielded transfer of this property outside my corporate structure, they picked up full personal liability for every regulated material on those grounds. Federal environmental law would see them as a private citizen running a commercial hazmat site. No license, no insurance, not a single valid permit to their name. None of this was something I had set up as a trap. It had simply been sitting there for 3 years. Derek had never thought to go looking. I kept every bit of that off my face. What I did instead was look at the video on his phone, then at the document, then down at my own hands flat on the table, and I let my shoulders sag forward in the measured, reluctant way of a man whose fight has finally run dry. If I put my name on this, I said, shading my voice toward thin and uncertain, I need your word you'll get rid of that footage. Lorene can't see that. She can never see that. He stretched across the table, lifted the pen from next to the document, and settled it into my hand with a pressure that stopped just short of force. Abe, sign the deed, Russid, he said, and I'll take care of everything. His gaze never left my hand. He was locked onto that signature line, the way a man stares at something he has been chasing long enough that seeing it this close feels almost unreal. I brought the pen down to the page. My hand moved in slow increments with a tremor I had been quietly rehearsing. I wrote out my full legal name, Russell Dale Haney, in the same careful cursive that had gone on 42 years of commercial contracts, and I made every stroke look like the mark of a man surrendering the last thing he owned. The attorney stamped it before the ink had a chance to settle the notary seal, coming down with a quickness that told you he'd had it ready the whole time. What happened to Derek's face next is something I won't easily forget. 10 days of jaw-set, eye-tight strain just fell away from him all at once. His whole frame loosened, shoulders down, the clench gone from his jaw. He gathered the deed in both hands and stared at it, the way people look at something they've compromised themselves badly enough to get a relief so complete it was nearly visible from across the room. He got to his feet and worked the buttons on his jacket. The smirk had returned bigger than before, and riding on top of that relief, it shaded into something that almost resembled joy, which was, I think, the most troubling expression I'd ever watched cross his face. "Have a good life, Russ," he said. "I'm being sincere. Find yourself somewhere easy to land and leave the complicated work to people built for it." I pushed back my chair, got up without rushing, and left that conference room without offering him a single word in return. Through the door behind me, I caught him say something to the attorney. Whatever it was, they both found it funny. The parking lot outside held cold, hard afternoon light. I climbed into my truck and sat a moment, palms resting on the wheel. Across town somewhere, Lorene was already settled at the lakefront estate. She'd moved everything that mattered out 3 days earlier, once Clifton called to tell us this was coming. The house Derek had signed his name onto was no longer mine in any structural sense, but being his in a way that would ever pay off for him, that was something else entirely. I turned the key and rolled out of the lot. Didn't look back once. Lorene had made the move 2 days before that. We'd settled it between us without fanfare the morning after. Clifton spread Derek's full financial picture on the table. No raised voices, no drawn-out deliberation. That was always how Lorene and I handled the things that actually counted. She took the photographs, her mother's jewelry box, the few kitchen pieces that had come down from her mother's house before that. Whatever else the walls held, it was just a structure. By the time my truck rolled back onto the street I'd called home for 27 years, a white commercial van was already sitting in my driveway. Its magnetic door panel read Lake Wiley Lock and Key, and a man in a gray uniform was bent over my front door, drill in hand, working out the brass deadbolt I'd hung there myself in 1997. Derek's leased SUV sat angled onto the grass along the walkway. He'd come straight from the strip mall, not 1 minute spent savoring, before he moved to occupy what he was convinced belonged to him now. I pulled to the curb and didn't move right away. That October light in the Carolinas had gone wide and amber across the face of the house, the kind of afternoon glow that arrives when the season is tipping over, when ordinary things take on a warmth that makes you feel like you're watching them for the final time. The oak out front had shed nearly all of it, leaves spread across the grass in copper and brown. I stepped out and started up the walk. Derek filled the doorway before my foot touched the bottom porch step. His jacket was off. The quit-claim deed hung from one hand, held the loose way you carry something once it's done what you needed it to do. Down the hallway behind him sat 2 of their duffel bags, the same ones that had been dropped onto my floor 10 days ago. "You've got roughly 15 minutes, Derek said. There was no real smile on him, but around his eyes something had gone slack in a way that hadn't been there for days. The particular looseness of a man who has just cleared his most urgent problem and hasn't begun to reckon with what follows. "Take whatever's yours and clear out. Raymond's nearly finished with the locks." Carla stood at the far end of the hallway, phone in hand, her eyes fixed on the wall rather than on me. Her whole body held the stiff discomfort of someone who is aware they are in the wrong and has made a deliberate choice not to sit with that awareness. "Carla," I said. She turned to look at me. Her jaw was set hard and the skin around her eyes was raw and faintly swollen. She'd been crying at some point, but had since packed that away somewhere. She couldn't reach it, at least, not with me standing there. "You brought this on yourself, Dad," she said, her voice flat and practice shaped by whatever she'd been telling herself on the drive over. "If you'd been reasonable from the start, none of it would have had to go this way. Get your things. We have contractors coming first thing tomorrow." I stood there looking at my daughter for a long moment. I thought about the step stool she used to drag up to the counter when she was 9, standing next to Lorene with her tongue pressed tight between her lips while she helped measure nutmeg into the bowl. I thought about the Saturday mornings she'd ride out with me to job sites and how she'd be asleep against the truck window before we'd made it halfway home, her cheek flat against the glass, both hands curled small in her lap. Then I walked past her. My boots hit the hardwood the way they always had, that particular blunt thud that 42 years of steel-toed work boots leaves on every floor you've ever crossed. I went up the stairs for the last time. In the bedroom, I pulled down the old leather suitcase from the top closet shelf, the one I'd picked up in 1988 from a luggage shop in downtown Charlotte that had long since been gutted and turned into a coffee chain. I didn't touch the clothes, not the furniture, not the linens, not the kitchen things, not a single object from the 27 years this house had been absorbing our life. What I took was the framed photograph off the dresser Lorene and me on the dock at Lake Lure, our 25th anniversary sun, dropping behind us, both of us laughing at something I've since lost the memory of. I took the small wooden box from the nightstand where Lorene kept the pearl earrings that had come from her mother. I took the original set of wire strippers from my very first commercial electrical contract in 1982, still in their canvas roll, still sharp. I went back down the hallway and stopped at the door to Carla's old room. It was shut. It had been shut for a long time now. I pressed my palm flat against the wood and held it there for exactly 3 seconds. I could feel the grain through the paint, the particular texture of a surface that has belonged to one house long enough to carry its character. Then I took my hand away and went downstairs. Derek was waiting at the bottom. Before I'd cleared the last step, he reached out and lifted the leather suitcase from my grip, not as any kind of gesture, but simply to get it out of my hands as efficiently as he could manage. He carried it to the front door and dropped it on the porch outside, in one motion, the way you set out recycling, and don't think twice about it. "Have a good evening, Russ," he said. The locksmith stepped back as Derek swung the new door shut in my face. The deadbolt turned with a sound I had never heard before. In that house, the sound of my own front door sealing me out, and it landed in my chest in a way I'm not going to try to put words to. I stood on the porch. Then I picked up the suitcase and went down the steps and along the concrete path to the curb. A black SUV sat there, idling, windows tinted. The man behind the wheel was in a dark suit, and he was out of the vehicle and moving toward me before I'd fully reached the sidewalk. He came to where I was standing, lifted the leather suitcase from me with both hands, and carried it to the back of the vehicle with the kind of quiet deliberateness that was completely at odds with everything that had just happened inside. He pulled the rear passenger door open without a word. I got in. The interior was warm and still and carried the scent of clean leather. A bottle of cold, sparkling water sat in the center console, and the seat shifted to meet me as I settled into it. Lorene was already there on the other side, and the moment the door closed, she reached across and took my hand. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Through the tinted glass, I could still see the front of the house. In the living room window, Derek appeared briefly with his phone already raised, probably mid-call. The warm overhead light caught him from inside, and from this distance through this glass, he looked exactly like a man who believed he had just come out on top. The driver eased us away from the curb. The house slid out of view. Lorene's hand was steady and warm in mine, and the road we were on was heading somewhere Derek Prudhomme had no notion of. The lakefront estate was at the end of a private gravel lane that threaded through a quarter-mile of hardwood timber before the property opened up in front of you. In the mornings, when the water was unbroken and the early light came in, low from the east through the tree line, the place held a quality of real stillness, the kind I had spent 30 years building toward, and had only lately given myself permission to actually live inside. Lorene was already downstairs when I came down. She'd made coffee and was out on the cedar deck in her wool robe, both hands wrapped around her mug, watching the water. The lake surface was pewter-colored in the early light, flat and undisturbed, and a great blue heron was posted in the shallows near the dock, with the motionless patience of a creature that has long since learned not to spend energy on what it can't control. I poured myself a cup and went out to stand beside her. We stayed like that for a few minutes, neither of us speaking, but it was nothing like the freighted silence the evening before had held. This was the comfortable, specific quiet that belongs to two people who have stood beside each other long enough that words can be unnecessary without being a failure. Clifton's text had come in at 7:14. County clerk processed the deed transfer last night. Automated federal notification triggered at midnight. EPA Regional Office. Charlotte received the flag at 12:04 a.m. Expect response this morning. I handed Lorene the phone. She read it, passed it back, and turned her eyes back out to the water. How long do you think before they show up? She asked. Federal agencies move quickly when the paperwork has already been put in front of them, I said. Clifton made sure it was. She gave a small nod and brought the mug back to her lips. I opened the security application on my tablet and brought up the camera feeds for the Lake Wiley house. Derek and Carla weren't visible yet. The front of the house looked the same as it always had. The oak stripped bare, the driveway empty, the new deadbolt picking up a thin glint of morning sun. At 8:47, the first vehicle turned onto the street. It was a white commercial van carrying a green federal seal on the door, then a second van, then two black government SUVs. They angled in across the driveway and the front lawn, and the people climbing out wore high-visibility yellow vests with EPA printed in dark block letters across the back. Two of them were already pulling caution tape from their kits before they'd fully cleared their doors. On the tablet screen, I watched a woman in a Navy jacket badge clipped to her lapel, metal clipboard in hand, come up the front walk and knock with the kind of knock that is not asking permission. Derek opened the door in sweatpants and a rumpled undershirt, his hair uncombed. Whatever he had pictured for a Thursday morning at his newly acquired property, it was not standing face to face with this. I had no audio from the exterior camera, but the body language told it clearly enough. The EPA agent spoke. Derek's expression moved through confusion, then impatience, then into something that was working hard to pass for confidence and not quite getting there. He crossed his arms. He said something. She answered. She held out a stack of documents and he took them, and the hand that received them was noticeably less steady than it had been half a minute before. Two agents went past him into the house. He turned to follow them with his eyes, and the agent at the door said something that snapped his attention right back to her. Carla materialized behind him in the doorway in a bathrobe, her hair loose, her face open and frightened in the undefended way that only happens when something arrives before a person has assembled themselves for the day. The two agents who'd entered through the front came back out 4 minutes later from the side door that opened to the basement stairs. One of them raised a radio to his mouth. The lead agent jotted something on her clipboard and turned back to Derek. I had seen enough to know what they were finding. Down in that basement sat 14 sealed industrial drums of regulated high-voltage insulation and compound and dielectric transformer fluid materials my commercial crews used across large-scale electrical infrastructure projects. Properly stored, properly labeled, entirely legitimate. And under federal environmental law, the exclusive liability of whoever held the deed to the ground above them. Derek had taken that deed the previous afternoon in a strip mall conference room without asking a single question about what the property contained or what obligations rode along with it. His attorney had skipped the zoning search, never requested a property disclosure, never checked the county environmental registry, where the registered commercial use of my basement had been sitting in plain sight for 3 years. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Derek. I picked up and put it on speaker so Lorene could hear. You set me up. Gone was the voice he used for negotiations or for pushing people around all the registers I'd watched him work through across the years. What was left underneath was something stripped bare, pure panic, high and tight, and barely holding together. You handed me a house with federal chemicals sitting in the basement. You knew about this. You knew, and you said nothing. Good morning, Derek, I said. Don't good morning me. His breath was loud on the line. There are EPA agents standing on my lawn right now. They're telling me I am personally liable for the storage of regulated materials on a commercial site. They're talking about a fine of nearly $2 million. You need to call them off. Call Clifton and reverse the deed transfer right now. I looked out at the lake. The heron hadn't shifted an inch. The environmental status of that property has been on file with the county and the relevant federal agencies for 3 years, I said. It's public record. Any attorney running a standard title search before advising a client to accept a direct property transfer would have turned it up inside an hour. You knew I wouldn't look. You brought your own lawyer, Derek. You picked the location. You drafted the document. You pressed the pen into my hand. I let a beat pass. I gave you exactly what you asked for. There was a sound from the other end of the line that wasn't quite a word, something caught between a groan and a gasp. "Reverse the deed," he said. The panic had shifted into something that edged toward begging a sound I hadn't anticipated from him, and one I found I had no particular feeling about either way. "I'll delete the video. I'll go to the police and tell them I made up the assault claim. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. Just take the property back, please." "You should find yourself an attorney," I said. "A better one this time." I ended the call and laid the phone face down on the patio table. Lorene was looking at me. Her expression wasn't triumphant. It was something more worn than that, more deliberate, more final. "Is it over?" she asked. "This part," I said. She turned back toward the water. The heron spread its wings, pushed off from the shallows with 2 long strokes, and lifted in a slow, wide arc across the surface, until it crested the tree line on the far bank and was gone. Lorene watched until it disappeared. "He'll come here," she said, her voice quiet. "When he figures out the phone isn't going to get him anywhere, he'll get in that car." I reached for the tablet and opened the security interface for the estate. The system was already live, every feed, every sensor running. "I know," I said. "Let him come." I heard him before I saw him. The sound came through the walls at 7:18 in the evening. A metallic crack, then the sustained screech of stressed iron, the sound a 2-ton vehicle makes when it meets a gate that wasn't built to be driven through. I was in the second-floor study going over a contract amendment Clifton had forwarded, and the noise had me out of the chair and at the window in under 3 seconds. The leased SUV had struck the wrought iron entry gate at what I put at roughly 30 miles an hour. The front end had collapsed. The left headlight was dark. The gate itself had been knocked half off its upper hinge and swung open at a hard angle. Derek was already out of the vehicle, crossing the gravel at a clip toward the front entrance. In his right hand, he carried a steel crowbar that caught the motion sensor lights as he moved. Carla climbed out of the passenger side at a slower pace. She stood on the gravel in her coat, with both hands pressed flat to either side of her face, watching her husband move on the house with the crowbar raised. I crossed to the security panel on the wall and opened the master control interface on the tablet. The estate's security system was not residential grade. I had designed it myself, drawing on 2 decades of routing commercial electrical infrastructure through high-rise facilities, federal buildings, and pharmaceutical research campuses. The perimeter cameras were military specification. The ground floor window glass was ballistic polymer, 2 inches thick, rated for sustained impact. The interior ran a concealed alert network that connected directly to Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department dispatch on a priority channel. I had left the front gate on standard hinges for a reason. I needed Derek to be able to breach it if he made that choice. I needed him inside the property. I needed him to make this decision somewhere every second of it would be captured, documented, and beyond dispute. The first crowbar swing caught the front entrance glass and rang out like a gunshot. The ballistic polymer held, fracturing into a white web of cracks but not giving way. Derek swung again harder. His face had become something I didn't recognize from the man who used to sit at my holiday table, making easy conversation about my work boots. He swung a third time, and the frame around the glass surrendered before the glass itself did, and he stepped through into the foyer. I pressed the activation icon on the tablet. The response was instant and total. A 130 decibel commercial security siren detonated from speakers set into the ceiling of every ground floor room, simultaneously a tone specifically calibrated to cause physical disorientation in an enclosed space. The recessed lighting flipped to a rapid strobe, white and overwhelming, reducing the interior to a churning chaos of light and dark. From tracks above every ground floor window and exterior doorway, solid steel security shutters dropped on motorized rails and locked into floor receivers with a synchronized concussion that moved through the floorboards. The front entrance sealed behind Derek before he had taken 4 steps into the foyer. He dropped the crowbar immediately, both hands clamping over his ears, staggering and catching the entry table with his shoulder. A ceramic piece Lorene and I had brought back from a trip to Blowing Rock 12 years ago came off the table and broke on the floor. Derek bent forward, the strobe killing his sense of position, reaching for any fixed point to anchor himself, and finding none. I moved to the interior balcony on the second floor, and looked down through the floor-to-ceiling ballistic glass panel enclosing the railing. The whole foyer was visible below me. Derek was on his knees, both hands locked over his ears, his face twisted with pain and panic, and with the particular terror of a man who has walked into a space that is entirely against him and has no exit available. He looked up. He found me on the second floor, standing behind the glass with my arms at my sides, looking down at him. I was wearing the flannel shirt Carla had knitted for me when she was 12 years old. I had put it on that morning without any intention behind it and hadn't thought to take it off. Derek's mouth was moving, but the siren swallowed whatever he was saying. His expression turned through rage, then bewilderment, then landed somewhere that could only be called raw, unguarded fear. The fear of a man who has run out of moves and has become aware of it. Outside on the exterior cameras, I watched Carla on the gravel. She had drifted away from the ruined SUV and was standing at the outer edge of the motion sensor light's reach. Both hands still pressed to her face, no longer watching the house. Her eyes turned instead toward the road. And then the lights appeared, red and blue pulsing through the trees at the far end of the private lane, resolving into 4 Mecklenburg County Police Department cruisers coming hard down the gravel, their sirens cutting across the water. The estate's security system had transmitted the priority alert the instant I triggered it. Response time, from the nearest unit, 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Carla saw the cruisers and spun toward the house, screaming something at the sealed front entrance that didn't reach me. Then she turned toward the incoming cruisers, and something in her entire bearing shifted in, under a second, the same switch I had watched in my living room 10 days earlier when the first officers came through the door. The wild, frantic woman simply vanished. What replaced her was someone fragile, shaken in desperate need of help. She ran toward the lead cruiser with her hands up, and I watched her point toward the house. Gestures speak and cry, working the role of the frightened wife whose unstable elderly father-in-law had drawn her husband into an ambush. A silver sedan pulled in behind the last cruiser. Clifton stepped out, briefcase in hand, suit jacket, button moving, with the unhurried steadiness of a man who was right where he knew he would be and had made every necessary preparation well in advance. I pressed the release on the tablet. The steel shutter over the front entrance ground upward on its track. Derek came through the opening on his hands and knees, coughing the crowbar still lying where he'd dropped it on the foyer floor. He raised both hands when the officers came into view. He was saying something, probably some version of what he always said, the words about reputation and career and a terrible misunderstanding. But the commanding officer was already moving toward him and had no interest in any of it. They brought him down hard and fast, face against the hood of the nearest cruiser, hands wrenched behind his back. Handcuffs for the 3rd time in 12 days. And this time, when the commanding officer read out the charges breaking and entering malicious destruction of property, felony violation of a permanent judicial protection order, he delivered the final line with a particular kind of finality. You are being held without bail pending arraignment. Carla heard those words, and her performance fell apart completely. The fragile victim dissolved, and what came out in its place was something unguarded and genuinely broken, a cry that rose from somewhere real, not rehearsed. The sound of a person hearing a door shut permanently. Clifton approached the commanding officer and presented the restraining order documentation, security footage time-stamped from the gate, impact forward, and a formal statement from my attorney of record. The officer read through it, glanced at Carla, and gave a quiet instruction to a second officer who moved in her direction. I came down the stairs and out through the side entrance and took up a position on the stone steps, watching everything settle into its conclusion. The red and blue lights swept across the front of the estate, across the ruined gate, across the crumpled hood of the leased SUV. Derek was in the back of a cruiser. Carla was speaking with an officer near the tree line, both arms pulled tight across herself, her face a ruin of mascara and exhaustion. She looked up and found me standing on the steps. We held each other's gaze across the gravel and the light and the distance that had built between us over 12 days and over several years, and perhaps considerably longer than that. Carla looked away first. Her shoulders came forward, her hands went over her face, and she began to cry, in earnest, deep and ugly and unperformed, the crying of a person who has exhausted every available strategy. Clifton came to stand beside me. He said nothing right away. We watched the officers finish their work in the cold October air. "It's done," Clifton said. "Finally." "Almost," I said. 6 months went by. The way time moves after something large and irrevocable has taken place, not fast, not slow, but with an altered texture to it each day, ordinary on its surface and carrying underneath the full weight of what had changed. Derek Prudhomme was assigned federal inmate number 8472 at a medium-security correctional institution in Butner, North Carolina, 45 minutes north of Raleigh. He had been sentenced to 58 months on consolidated charges of wire fraud, criminal bribery, and felony assault of a person over 65 years of age. His firm had dissolved within 2 weeks of the federal indictment entering the public record. His professional network had evaporated at roughly the same pace the thin variety of loyalty that attaches itself to the appearance of success and releases the moment that appearance cracks. The IRS had seized his remaining domestic assets in full. The EPA fine of $185 million was non-dischargeable under any bankruptcy proceeding he filed or would ever file. It would trail him for the rest of his working life, accruing interest in the background of every attempt he ever made to rebuild. A permanent consequence of a single afternoon in a strip mall conference room where he had been too certain of himself to read the paperwork. Carla had cooperated fully with the federal prosecutors. Her plea agreement required the surrender of every asset tied to the marriage, which left her with the clothes she owned outright and a credit history that would need years to come back from. The downtown condo had been foreclosed and auctioned. The vehicles were repossessed. The jewelry, the designer wardrobe, the carefully maintained social media presence underwritten by borrowed money, all of it gone. She was living in a studio apartment on the south side of Charlotte, riding the bus to work, pulling overnight shifts, waiting tables at a place called the Daybreak Diner on a commercial strip that smelled of diesel and fryer oil. The woman who had once stood in my living room in a pressed wool coat and announced she was taking over. My bedroom was now wearing a polyester uniform and non-slip shoes, carrying plates of eggs and toast to truckers and night shift workers until 4 in the morning. Clifton relayed these things during his quarterly briefing. He delivered them the way he delivered everything, no editorializing, no visible emotion, just the clean and level language of documented fact. I listened, thanked him, and kept to myself what I was actually thinking, that none of this felt like winning. It felt like the aftermath of a fire, necessary, final, and sad in the particular way things are sad when they could have been different and weren't. Lorene said nothing to me about Carla for the first 5 months. She moved through her days with the steady, purposeful energy she had always carried, cooking, reading, walking the property perimeter each morning in her wool coat while the lake mist burned off. She planted bulbs along the south side of the deck in early March and told me they'd come up in April, and I wasn't to pull them thinking they were weeds. On the second Thursday of April, she wasn't downstairs when I came for coffee. Her car was gone from the driveway. On the counter was a note, 2 words in her hand, back soon. She came back 2 hours later. She came in through the side door, hung her coat on the hook, and washed her hands at the kitchen sink with her back to me. And I waited. When she turned around, her eyes were wet, not spilling over, just wet the way eyes look after something has moved through them and left a trace. I went to see her, Lorene said. I set my mug down. She was on shift, Lorene said. She didn't see me come in. I took the corner booth and sat there for a few minutes watching her. Her voice was measured and controlled and clearly costing her something to hold that way. She looks thin, Russ. She looks very tired. Her hands are rough. Lorene stopped and pressed her lips together for a moment. She looks like someone learning something the hard way and not yet sure she's going to come through it. What did you do? I asked. I left her something. Lorene reached into the pocket of her cardigan, brought out a small white envelope unsealed, and held it out to me. I opened it. Inside was the photograph from the state fair, the one that had sat on the kitchen counter of our old house for 30 years. Carla, at 7 years old, perched on my shoulders, both of us caught mid-laugh by some stranger Lorene had handed her camera to. The glass had been cracked when Derek knocked it off the shelf the day he and Carla arrived with their duffel bags. I had gathered up the pieces and carried them with me when I packed my leather bag. Someone had repaired it. The cracks were still there, thin white lines running through the image, but the photograph was whole. I looked at Lorene. I had it fixed last month, she said. I was going to hold on to it, but this morning I thought she should have it instead. Something tightened in my throat in a way I hadn't seen coming. Did she see you leave? I asked. No, Lorene said. I was out the door before she came back to that section. She paused. I didn't want her to feel like it had strings attached. We sat together at the kitchen table, with the morning light falling through the windows, and the lake stretched out beyond the deck flat and silver in the April air. A pair of ospreys had built a nest in the tall pine down at the water's edge, and one of them was standing on the nest's rim, looking out over the water, with the fixed, unhurried patience of a creature made for precisely this kind of waiting. I thought about 42 years of early mornings and steel-toed boots and the particular smell of industrial work that had once mortified my daughter at dinner parties. I thought about what those years had actually produced, not just the financial structure Derek had tried to take, but the real substance underneath it, the capacity to hold on, to plan ahead, to stay patient when patience was the only thing left in your hand. I reached across the table and laid my hand over Lorene's. Her knuckles were warm and faintly rough from her morning in the garden, and she turned her palm up and held mine, without shifting her gaze from the window. Outside, the osprey pushed off from the nest's edge, opened its wings to their full reach, and drove itself out over the water in one long, clean arc that carried it across the lake and past the far tree line until it was gone. Lorene watched until it disappeared. "Do you think she'll call?" she asked. I looked down at our hands joined on the table, scarred and calloused, and 45 years accustomed to each other. "I think she'll have to find out who she is first," I said, "and then maybe she will. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I want to say thank you. Stories like this one don't get easy. They don't wrap up clean, and they shouldn't. What this cost me was something I am still recounting. Years of watching someone I raised turn into someone I didn't recognize. The slow erosion of trust, and then the sudden ugly speed of betrayal when it finally broke into the open. I believe God places certain trials in front of us not to break us, but to show us, and anyone watching, what we were quietly made of all along. What was built through 42 years of early mornings and honest work cannot be taken by a signature or a crowbar or a manipulated piece of footage. It can only be surrendered, and I never surrendered it. Here is what I'd want you to take from this, whether you're going through something like it or, someone who is. Document everything from the very first day something feels wrong. Silence protects no one but the person exploiting it. If someone rushes you to sign anything at all, that urgency is the warning. Slow down. Read it. Have someone you trust read it too. Patience is not weakness. Sometimes the only right move is to wait and let the other person finish revealing themselves. And if the people closest to you are willing to do the worst, know that there are still people in this world worth trusting. Build toward them. These are the grandpa revenge stories I tell because I live them, and because I know there are father stories out there, just like this one, men and women sitting in quiet rooms trying to figure out if they still have any ground left to stand on. You do. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If this story moved something in, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. I read them, and what you write matters to me. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Grandpa's Revenge so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself out there. I mean that.